in the Middle East. President Biden says a deal to secure the release of some of the 230 Israeli hostages held captive by Hamas since the 7th of October is getting close.
Some of their families spoke to the Israeli embassy in London yesterday. Among them was Thomas Hand, father of 9-year-old Emily, who initially thought his daughter had been killed in the attack. This was an unbelievable interview. He described the nightmare that he's been going through. Just watch this, my friends.
The sheer terror of a 9-year-old girl down in those dark tunnels, never seeing the light of day. But sheer terror, panic, every hour of every day. She must be saying every day, "Where's my daddy? Where's my daddy? Why isn't he coming to save me?"
Gets me as a dad, that. Joining us now is former NATO Commander, Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry. Chris, thank you as ever for joining us on Talk today. Heartbreaking stories from relatives there, conversations and some conversations that overnight Biden and other people might be moving towards the release of hostages. There could be a 5-day pause, ceasefire, whatever. Thoughts this morning, Chris?
Well, with regard to the hostages, I'll believe it when I see it. I think you've heard some of the parents and relatives of the hostages saying, until they're in Israel, we can't believe anything Hamas says. I think we've seen throughout this, there isn't anything that Hamas won't do to advance its military and terrorist objectives, and that's part of the process at the moment. 5-day pause. The Israelis have got military objectives they want to pursue. They're quite clear about what they want to do in Gaza, and I'll be surprised if that condition can be met in relation to the hostages.
And what are they doing to mitigate the chances of some of those hostages sadly becoming victim to Israel's own military attacks? We know that 13,000 people now have been killed within Gaza. Is it an increase in intelligence, or how can they possibly know where these hostages are in order to know where not to attack?
Well, I think, Nicola, they're basically thinking, well, these are valuable tools in Hamas's toolbox, so they're not going to expose them to places where the Israelis can actually hit them. I think we've seen some of the hostages already have been killed. They haven't been killed by Israeli bombs. They've been killed by Hamas fighters and Gazans. So I suspect they're being kept very carefully hidden, probably underground. We've seen some of them in the hospitals and other protected spaces. These are very valuable pieces on the chessboard for Hamas, so they'll be taking great care of them, I would think. The Israelis are trying to be so careful in what they're doing. If you look at some of the bombs they're using, they're designed to explode upwards. There's no sideways blast at all.
Do you really think they're doing that utmost, though? They've bombed hospitals, they've bombed refugee camps.
Well, Nicola, I mean, this is all part of the sort of vocabulary. The hospital is concealing Hamas militarised headquarters. We found arms dumps there. We know Hamas uses mosques and things like that. A refugee camp is just a suburb. Everybody thinks it's a sort of tented enclosure. It isn't. It's a suburb that's been going for about 70 years. It's like in South London, it's Clapham, if you like. You could call Clapham a refugee camp, but it is built up. But
there's obviously reasons why there's a large built-up refugee camp for the past 70 years. There's a huge history to that, and you can understand why that would feel particularly pertinent to Palestinians for that area to have been targeted, because they're refugees once, now they're
they're third-generation residents now, of course.
Yeah. My whole problem, and I watched Guterres, is that you say Antonio Guterres, the UN guy overnight, say it's important to transform this tragedy into an opportunity to sit down and talk. We want a two-state solution. Without anybody saying he's off on one, the UN has shown itself to be completely useless, which is, in my opinion, why we're in this position. It's very good for all these virtue signals to sit up and down and go, oh. The fact of the matter is, nobody likes, Chris Parry, what we are seeing. None of us know what is true and what is not true, because it's being played out on social media. Nick and I have talked about this every single morning. There is no doubt that there is nobody in the world, bar, I suspect, Hamas, who does not believe that this is a terrorist organisation that needs to be exterminated, right? But it's what happens in the process of this. Of course, we all absolutely want these hostages home. I don't know how long this will go on, but when you see and when you make it real with that father, and I have kids, it breaks your heart. And I think it's a salient point from Nick, because how can they be sure that they won't be... I mean, it's just a horrible thing. Let's make the point. Hamas are using these hostages as human shield. That's why they've taken the damn hostages in the first place. And I support absolutely what Israel are doing, but how can we be sure, as sure as we are, that they can get them out? I don't know. It's just it's horrible. It's horrible.
Well, nobody knows. And the fact of life is, if you're a senior Israeli politician or military leader right now, you have military objectives that you have to pursue in Gaza. And I have to say, having been in these situations myself, you have to put some emotions to the back of your mind. Obviously pity, obviously empathy, sympathy occurs. But the fact of life is, emotion is used as a weapon by Hamas and other insurgent groups like this, terrorist groups. And if you allow emotion to get in the way, you'll end up losing the hostages and the war itself.
And this is a war. Let's make the point. And war ain't nice.
Of course. You know, there's a difference, though, between, I would argue, emotion and humanity, and we must make sure that we don't lose our humanity within all of this. Yeah. It's the Qataris who are allegedly brokering this deal with Hamas. Yeah. What do you think about their involvement and how trustworthy they can be in actually brokering a successful deal?
Well, it's a good question, Nicola, isn't it? They're not honest brokers. They're actually hosting the Hamas leadership in luxury in a very nice penthouse apartment. We know that a lot of operations are being directed from there. I would say that they have an interest as well in these negotiations. And let's face it, quite a lot of the regimes across the greater Middle East are really worried about Hamas and Hezbollah because they represent a fundamental threat to their own regimes as well. If you listen to what Hamas and Hezbollah say in the background, they're Iranian proxies, and the Iranians have really no love for the people who live on the south side of the Gulf at the moment. We have to bear in mind that this business with Israel is a catalyst for Iran setting the greater Middle East on fire.
Well, I believe that, having watched and read so much about this over the last 7 weeks, because Hamas must have known what was going to happen when you poke the bear. The response has been from Israel phenomenal. There has to be other involvement. There has to be a bigger picture here.
My hunch, actually, Jeremy, is that Hamas jumped the gun.
Really?
I think there was a coordinated plan which the Iranians had to actually destabilise Israel on a couple, maybe even more than a couple of fronts. And I think Hamas saw an opportunity. It may even have been that sort of peace rave in the south of the country. They took the opportunity to do something, and I think they jumped the gun, frankly. And the Iranians obviously were put on the back foot by that.
It'll be very interesting. Interesting is the wrong word, Nick, isn't it? I mean, it's something I've said from day one. We will follow and we will report. And please God, those hostages get out. Please God, the IDF have managed to get rid of that revolting terrorist organisation ASAP. Chris, thank you so much indeed, my friend.
Thank you so much, Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry.